I want to read for you this write-up that came with this, because now we're going to go into silence, so we have 35 minutes left. I will keep talking, but you will be going into silence verbally and electronically. We try to use this time to go into silence physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, all these things. Because then we can cause this deep things to come to the surface, and also we are learning to increase our focus of attention on the non-physical, because you want to develop your third eye. So for that, the ability to focus on the non-physical is very helpful. So I would like to read this write-up because I think that it really tells what we want to do together over these few days. And of course you've all read it, but I'll still read it again. So this is converging in yogic silence. Silence can propel consciousness beyond the everyday world. True silence arises through pure thought. When higher thoughts circulate in the mind, you can transcend distracting associations and memories, preoccupations, worries, fears, obsessions, and the residual mental effects of trauma. Then there can be true silence. The practice of circulating pure thought patterns restructure the synapses, brain function, mental and emotional balance. You achieve stable tranquility and tap into otherwise inaccessible and untapped creativity that lies in the depth of your soul. Refraining from speech is helpful for internalization. However, interaction with our devices overrides the power of not speaking. Our devices are highly addictive, and so it's good to try to be without them. Inner silence cannot be achieved through attempts to stop thoughts or overpower the inner turmoil that sometimes besets the mind. Tranquility and serenity arise when intelligence is moved by truth, detachment, and wisdom. The mind remains transcendent and non-reactive to the pairs of opposites, the ebb and flow of life, relationships, perceptions, and the ego monsters have subsided. Seeking solace through external silence is deceptive. There are always sounds, distractions, pulls on the mind and heart. Attractions and repulsions keep your awareness bound to sense perceptions. This is not the way. Spiritual practice is to remain independent of sense perceptions while perceiving them. It is to operate from within while being in the world of sights and sounds, relationships and places which may or may not be pleasant. The Raj Yogi seeks to operate from within the face and not to block or avoid, but to select what enters the mind and what remains on the outside. Yoga is skill in action, states the Bhagavad Gita. Yoga means to be in a higher state of consciousness, connected with the divine, while interacting with destiny and with challenges that require engagement. Converging in yogic silence is a state of balance, always moving, always quiet, always shifting between the actor and the observer. There is understanding when to engage and when to remain the witness, knowing intuitively what is the most appropriate. A yogi is called an independent master, a neutralizer of the weight of past negative karma, and an acceptor of death. The final convergence is the return to the last good night, the return to the stillness of nirvana. A life of purity and balance, with as much positive impact on the world as possible, ultimately comes to a close. The actor prepares to depart, leaving a valuable legacy behind. Each day, some time is given to deep silence, detachment from the body, and contemplation of the incorporeal divine in the world of light. Eventually, eyes close for the last time and the soul moves on. So these words try to encapsulate what we want to accomplish, not just with this retreat, which is just a few days, but every so often we come together. Many of you have come together with me and Jacqueline in this silence retreat, and it's a long, long journey for our whole life, and we move a little bit at a time. I think every time we meet, we get closer to each other and a little more comfortable with the path and the destination. As I said, it is a purging, but also you might have noticed while I was reading, talk about weight of karma. And karma, negative karma, is there in everyone's past somewhere along the line. And it constitutes a weight which pushes the soul out of alignment with your, you can say, your higher purpose or your truth, or being totally right with the self. And this weight is something that we seek to neutralize and finish, because then you are free. Where the weight is pushing you one way or the other, you're not free. And so it is said for karma that it's a bondage, and it ties you and prevents you from being who you really are. So this practice is also there to cause these things that are residues and part of this weight to come up to the surface of your consciousness, because there you see what you're dealing with. Otherwise, when all these things are in the subconscious, they drive you, but you don't know what they are. So to bring them to the conscious mind means you know what you're dealing with, and you apply the powers that you acquire gradually to sort these things out and assert your mastery over your life. And so we move completely away from anything like feeling guilty. Sometimes people feel guilty, right? Feel guilty. But actually, if you analyze this idea of feeling guilty, you realize that it doesn't make any sense. You either are or you're not. And so, feeling guilty, where does it come from? The feeling guilty comes from, it's like a little message from the conscience which says, oops, don't do that. Oh, too late, I did it. Oops, well, don't do it again. Okay, got it. Not more than that. You don't need any more guilt than that. Because feeling guilty adds to the weight, and we want to remove the weight. Feeling guilty comes from, in my terminology, religions. And I do make quite a big distinction between religions and spirituality. So religion understands about purging, but it doesn't understand how, and does give instructions that actually don't really work. So it's better to have things that work. And so one is really very neutral about good and bad. One thing that people don't really know is that when someone does something bad to you, or when something bad happens to you for whatever reason, this adds to the toxicity of this in the soul. And so we need to also learn how to deflect these things from penetrating the soul and sort of infecting it. So we need to learn about being neutral about bad things rather than react to them. So for example, in the study that we did this morning, was saying, how come you don't know how to not bother about insults? When people insult you, how come you don't know how to do that? How come you don't know how to be neutral about when people defame you and oppose you and things like that? And I think this is because we fall back to a default relationship with good and bad, which actually allows us to suffer. And learning how to be free from these things, not take it personally, not bother with it, transform it, turn it into something else, is much better. So everybody knows not to give harm or sorrow to others, but nobody knows not to accept it from others. So this is an important thing to learn, because it's part of becoming free. And I think this is also why we have this idea in our study that whatever anybody does is anyway fixed in their destiny. So that's the way it is. but it doesn't matter because it's not really your problem, somebody else's destiny, right? We get impacted by it if we take it in. But if we don't take it in, it's just grist for the mill, something like that. We want to prepare ourselves for silence. I think we have to individually decide at what level we want to do it. And, one thing is not talking, which means that there's normally a slight amount of artificiality when you're in a group together but not talking. So there are all kinds of signals that can be used for necessary communication. But I think the main thing about silence is to observe what kind of thoughts arise in the mind. Because when you're silent, you tend to be closer to things that otherwise you might not notice because you're busy with other stuff. And general noise, TV, films, this, that, interaction, and so on, hides a lot of those things. So when you are deliberately being silent, then many things come up in your mind. And this is part of the process of kind of opening the doors of the subconscious, because we really want to see the extent to which we are invaded. One thing is negative thoughts, but the other is meaningless thoughts. Trivia, distraction, to notice how easily we are distracted by something that is not of any importance, but yet it pulls the mind away from where you want to be. So while being in silence, you want to be with yourself. And with yourself means not necessarily with your normal everyday self, but with the self which we call the original state of being. So the original state of being of every being is beautiful, pure, and extraordinary. But very rarely do you make contact with that, so you don't know that it is so. So one thing is to hear that it is so, but to experience it, to feel it, to touch it, that means you know. And so part of the aim is to get there. And we have to be very patient. When we spend so many days in silence, there's a lot of resistance that comes up. And so then you have to create a policy for yourself in regard to resistance, that what will you do? If you resist the resistance, then you're using a certain amount of strength. Can you resist the resistance easily, or is it a struggle? So if it's a struggle, then you need to create some methods. And this is internal creativity about this. You may also find that coming into silence, coming close to yourself, encourages you to have lucid dreams when you're at rest. And these are very important. And if you do experience dreams, it's very good to write it down. I see everyone has a notebook, and you may also find many important, significant, or puzzling thoughts that arise. And these are good to note down, because part of silence is to give time to contemplate things that present themselves to you that may not seem important, but actually are very important for you. It's like when you're in silence, you give the opportunity for certain messages to come to you, like subtle messages from deep inside. Because when we are in what we call body consciousness means very materialistic in the sense of we're just in contact with the sense perception and the world of sense perception and all the stuff that comes to us from there. There is a kind of internal voice that when we spend time in silence, it can say, okay, now you need to be aware about this or think about this. If you experience something like that, note it down, because these things, sometimes they fly through quickly and get lost. And if you write it down, you capture it and then say, okay, now, yeah, I need to think about this. We'll also be inviting you to join us for the 4 a.m. meditation, which we call Amrit Vela. Amrit Vela means the hour of nectar. So this is a time when the world is quieter than normal and where the skies are open to the divine and you can have a very powerful connection. Sometimes in Amrit Vela, your demons will come out. And that's good because then you know what they are. And sometimes in Amrit Vela, you will really go beyond, far beyond, and really make a strong connection with the Divine Source, the Supreme Being, the Supreme Soul of God, and begin to create this open channel between yourself and this to enable you to become more subtle in terms of capturing spiritual understanding, you can say. When we are in regular consciousness, our mind and intellect and everything operates according to our training, academic training or social training, whatever. But there's a different way of using your consciousness, using your intellect, using your mind. So the silence can give you insights into that. And it's very good to acquire the ability to use your mental faculties in that way, because with that you can understand things that you can't understand with linear thinking. We need some tools to break through into just another way of using consciousness. I think that the nighttime is very important. Of course, you need to get good sleep. Sometimes take a little rest in the day so that you can have quiet time at night to write your impressions of how you're moving through this as the days go by. This would be a nice record for you. I think it's very important with silence to be patient. Normally our life is quite stressful, quite high intensity, quite quick. And silence means you go into a different time zone. When you're also going to be avoiding your electronic distractions, then the mind is not used to this type of stillness. You may get fidgety and irritated and want to go off and do something. And if you find something like this, as long as the weather holds, which I think it may well, take time to do silent walks in the area. When you're moving, you're creating a rhythm, and your silence attaches itself comfortably to some kind of rhythms, and this is a good way to work with it. See if you can avoid reading various literature, because this will engage your mind and pull you away from the work of being still and silent. Writing, I think, is part of it, but reading other stuff is a distraction away from what you're trying to do. Your aim is to be with yourself. Make contact with a part of yourself that very often you are not in contact with because of so many responsibilities and duties and performances. All of us are performing all the time about something or another. But to just be with yourself meaningfully is very beneficial. And discuss with yourself meaningfully, which is not the same as obsessive-compulsive self-talk. If you experience this other type of self-talk coming up, which is not the same as positive thought, then you need to decide what you will do with that. This is the sort of thing that takes over your mind, and it comes from the subconscious, and it drives you into ways of being and activities or behaviors that don't really correspond with the essential self. It corresponds with what happened to you along the way, and it creates a distortion in the self. And with silence, you're looking to make contact with this original self, who you were before anything ever happened. So you're in contact with a very high energy, high quality being that you are, that very rarely do you experience. So the aim is to be with that, because this is actually the destination of a spiritual practice, is to return to that original condition. The soul is observing itself. So I'm the soul. The energy of the self irradiates. And when you're in silence, you're capturing this radiance and bringing it back on itself. That's, I think, the best way I can put it. It's a really deep kind of self-contact, self-observation, and it doesn't have to be another person observing the self. The self can observe the self. In your mind, loop the energy of yourself back towards yourself. This is, for me, is a good way to do it, because otherwise you're going all out and losing energy that way. Sometimes it's disturbing, distressing, whatever, but when these things come up, it's just important to allow it to be what it is and welcome it. It's good or it's bad, whatever it is what it is. This is a very good thing to tell oneself about it. And you are such wonderful beings that I'm sure whatever it is that comes up, just the fact that as you go through life, things happen and they impact the person and they scar, and they you need to be free from these things. And you have a right. This is a right, basic human right, to be free. And so maybe we'll finish with just a few moments of silence together. And thank you. And Om Shanti.